Thank you to our speakers, and thank you to Courtney and Gabriella and Heather for handling all the behind the scenes stuff. There's a lot goes into making these, so greatly appreciate. So I wanted to talk a little bit about HVAC TV and announce the top 10 podcasts we had this year, and basically to say thank you to all of those who were involved in that. So the purpose of the channel, the HVAC TV YouTube channel, is to educate and empower the commercial HVAC community. So you can watch that channel on YouTube, or you can listen to the audio version of it on our podcast, which is also called HVAC TV. And that's available on all major podcast platforms. And you can go down, if you're watching this on our website, which you probably are, you can scroll down and there's links and QR codes to both the podcast and the YouTube channel. We'd love for you to be involved. So in the background of that photo is just a recent factory trip I took to Tigerflow with Casey Mitchell, and also shown in that photo is Lionel with Tigerflow, and Doug Sanders is running the camera. So thank you, Doug. If you're watching, we appreciate all your help with that. So the history, I wanted to put this right after Mark's presentation because, we started this online journey during COVID. When COVID hit, we were trying to figure out a way to still get in front of our engineering community, our contractors, provide value, and also to do some marketing and some selling. We do have a business we're trying to run, but one of the best ways to grow your business, in our experience, is to provide value, and we do that through educating online. So we started doing Teams meetings, and I don't know if y'all remember, but when COVID hit and Teams became real popular, it was kind of fun. It was novel. It was like, oh, this is great. We'd have 300 people on there, but that quickly died down because everybody's like, I'm so sick of Teams meetings, I can't stand it. So we, when LinkedIn Live came out, we started doing some of the live shows on LinkedIn, and we would take those shows and we put them up on our YouTube channel, which is called HVAC TV. And this channel, this endeavor has been a company thing. I'm the face of it. You see me a lot. Some people think it's my show. It's absolutely not my show. It's technically owned by Air Control Concepts, which is our parent company and the website we're streaming onto now. And it's really a group effort. So big shout out to those early, advocates of the program and helping me start it. Mark Murray was huge in that. So was Chris Adams, Adam Parker, Scott Winnis. All the leadership at Insight at the time were behind it, which is really rare to have that. So I'm grateful I work for a company that was really behind it, and we're really, what we were trying to do is just try new things. We weren't afraid to try new things, or sometimes I was afraid to try new things, but I would do them anyway, which is another whole discussion. But so we had the YouTube channel, we were doing the LinkedIn Lives. The way the podcast came up is Mark came to me, my boss, and said, hey, why don't we what do you think about starting a podcast? And I'm like, I think it's a waste of time. Like, who's going to listen to an HVAC podcast? And so I poo-pooed that idea, and come to find out a few months later, one of our competitors was going to start a podcast, and I didn't want them to leapfrog us, so I started a podcast, and I went for it. And to our surprise, people actually were listening to it. It was a great way to give back to the community and grow our brand and to help the engineering community, et cetera. So, I share that story, and kind of falls in line with what we were talking about earlier. You got to try new things, and you got to do new things. And sometimes my perception of that what not working was based on zero facts. It was just my opinion, which I've learned doesn't really mean a whole lot. So you got to try these new things and experiment with them. When you do, great things happen. So I credit a lot of where we're at today to, the idea of doing the podcast, and, thankfully I work for a company that lets us explore these new things. Anyway, so that's a little bit of history of the podcast and YouTube channel. And I want to thank everybody at our operating companies, everybody at our vendors who's been on there, customers have been on there. It's just been a great journey for us as a company, and for me personally, a great joy to be able to, use these social media tools to teach and give back to the engineering community. Okay, so enough of that. So let me see here. Trying to have a little trouble with this thing. Give me a sec. Okay, so the top 10 podcasts of the year. So we probably average 1 or 2 podcasts a week. So I don't know, that's 100-ish podcasts of the year. So top 10 in terms of, downloads and listen to time and things like that. So Number 10, it was titled Cooling Towers, the Unsung Heroes of HVAC. And this was done by Steven Schwalbert with SPX Marley, and also Matt Warren with Insight Partners. We're both involved in creating that podcast, so that's a great episode where we just talk about, Cooling Towers 101. So, okay. Number 9. So this was an interesting podcast. I interviewed Jason Richwine. Let me get my notes here so I make sure I give credit to everybody. Jason is with JCI, and he actually showed me how selecting cooling coils with a higher pressure drop can lead to a higher system efficiency, which I said, I don't think so. And then he explained it to me, and I was like, oh, you're right. So you can check that out too. And by the way, all of these top 10 we're going to be dripping out in a series on our podcast. So go below if you want to subscribe to the podcast starting January 23rd. We're going to start at 10, and we're going to release all 10 of them in a row, ending on New Year's Day. So I forgot to mention that. So if you want to listen to these, please subscribe to the podcast. Okay. So that was Jason Richwine with JCI. Thank you very much. Number 8. Okay. The critical role of cooling tower water treatment and reconstruction. So this was a good one too. And it's funny, there's 2 episodes that focus on cooling towers that are in the top 10. So subject matter in the top 10, cooling tower was pretty prominent. Just started snowing here, so that's pretty cool. The critical role of cooling tower water treatment and maintenance. We had Trace Blackmore, who's the host of a very popular podcast called Scaling Up H2O. And we also had 2 of our own folks from Insight Partners Recon, Justin Lynch and Clint Burns, who are experts at cooling towers in general and cooling tower renovations especially. So that was number 8 on our podcast list. Okay. Number 7. Mastering Moisture, Unveiling Desiccant Dehumidification Technology at CDI. So this was actually an interesting one. We actually did a live PDH show from CDI, which is Climate by Design, located in Owatonna, Minnesota. And I did that with Tom Peterson. And I think that's the number 7 because not only was the information really valuable, we were in the factory, it just looked really cool. So you can see that on the podcast and on our YouTube channel. So that was number 7. Okay, number 6. 6 most popular podcast. Emerging Heat Pump Trends with Sal Brunetto. So Sal is with Bosch, and he came on and talked about heat pumps. And you all know heat pumps are popular in the news right now because of the whole, going away from gas deal. But that was number 6, on our countdown. Make sure I'm not getting ahead of myself. Okay, number 5. Okay, number 5, attracting the next HVAC generation in terms of engineers, service technicians, and contractors. So this was kind of a little bit out of the norm. This was a PDH show we did. Actually, this is from last year's PDH Marathon, but was published on the podcast in January. And this was with Michael Morris, who's our VP of Operations at Air Control Concepts, Greg Crumpton, who has his own podcast called Straight Outta Crumpton, which is a great podcast, very informative in the commercial HVAC world. And Andrew Brown was also on here, and he's the host of the Lost Art of the Skilled Trades podcast. So we try to do what we can here to let people know that the trades are a great career path, especially in HVAC. So that's what that was all about. So I'm glad to see that's number 5 of the podcast. Number 4. Get this loaded up here. So number 4 was titled Breaking News with Don Gillis. This had to do with the R410A transition and this was, I believe, published earlier last year. Don Gillis is one of our, industry experts on the A2L transition, has been a huge help for us as a company in providing the information on the A2L transition, which has been rather confusing, in my opinion. That's why the next two PDH classes are on A2L. So thank you, Don. Don works for Chemours, and they're the manufacturer R454B. So thank you, Don. Okay, where are we at? Number 3. Getting close to number 1. Okay. Number 3. Understanding air conditioning and heat pump ratings in terms of understanding AHRI, the Department of Energy, and ASHRAE. So my guest for this podcast was Mark Fly, who was just on a minute ago. So Mark has done several podcasts on our YouTube channel, and this is extremely valuable information. There's a lot of confusion out there between AHRI, DOE, and ASHRAE. If you want to understand the differences, go listen to it. I've listened to it a few times because to me it is confusing because I'm not in those organizations, but it's very valuable information. So that was number 3. Okay, number 2. Okay, number 2, how to master custom air handlers from basic to advanced insights. And the 2 speakers on this podcast were Mark Murray, the president of Insight Partners, and Joe Nacarello with Nortec Air Solutions. That was number 2 for the year. This is an amazing podcast, in my opinion, because I've been in the business for 25 years, and I still struggle with how to explain what exactly a custom air handling unit is, other than it's built like a tank as compared to not a tank. That's the best I could do sometimes. But this is a really good podcast if you want to learn about custom air handlers from 2 of the industry experts, Mark Murray and Joe Nacarello. Please go check that out. That's number 2. And number 1 on the podcast for 2024 is Commercial HVAC Controls 101 from Basic to Advanced. And the guest speakers on that podcast were Chris Adams, who is our VP of Engineering, and Kirk Patton, who's our General Manager of Insight Controls. So you guys provided some very valuable information. That also was from last year's PDH Marathon, which was published in January. So you guys did an awesome job, Chris and Kirk. You did great. Yeah. There were some comments here I was looking at from the crew behind the scenes. But anyway, so thank you so much. Thank you, everybody. Again, subscribe to the podcast. Go down below. If you're watching on LinkedIn right now, please get over to our website because that feed's going to end soon because LinkedIn only allows a couple hours. I think we've exceeded that. So come over to the website and please follow us on the podcast. We're going to drip these out starting December 23rd. We'll start with number 10 and then, so you could just listen to them, see what people are listening to. And so glad that I'm able to do this and be the host. And thank you all for who have contributed to the podcast. We greatly, greatly appreciate you. So we have an intermission now until 12:30. So we'll probably hop back on a few minutes before 12:30. And it's snowing like crazy here. It's really cool. And thank you again for joining us today. And we'll see you in a bit.